Hi, Chris. Welcome to my channel. Thank you for coming on and being a guest of mine. I know we've been trying to work this out for a while, and I've been on your channel twice, and now I've launched my channel, and so I thought it was only appropriate to have you on as well. So, welcome.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here.
How's everything going over in the world of Chris Shelton on YouTube?
Busy, very busy right now. I am flat out on this video production of this tone scale video, and it's a big project, and it's going really good. And I'm very, very laser focused on it, and I think people are going to like it. It's a production. It's not just me sitting here talking. So I've been spending a lot of time on this thing lately.
I can't wait to see. Do you know roughly how long it's gonna? Is it gonna be like a feature length thing, or is it gonna be an hour? Like, do you have an idea of how long this thing's gonna be?
Well, actually, it's funny you ask because if I've formatted it in the script and everything, I've actually been laying out in a screenplay kind of way, and if it pans out that a page is a minute of screen time, then it's probably going to be about an hour 15, hour 20 minutes.
Wow. And that's going to take like 100 hours or more to
Yeah.
edit in post production once you filmed it, right? That's one thing I've learned, which I've done video editing and stuff before getting on YouTube, right? As part of my day job anyway. But when I spend time actually producing something nicely, the time just flies. But I do realize, hold on, how long did I spend editing that 15 minutes? And it's like 4 hours or something. If I, you can get caught up in it, and it does take a lot of time to do post production.
Oh, all kinds. And I'm still in the pre-production phase. I started recording the voiceover work, and I'm working with an animator to do some animations, and that's really fun. And I got my storyboard templates here. I got to draw down. So it's a work in progress, but it definitely, the amount of work you do behind the scenes is it's a lot. It's deceptive how much time it takes.
Yeah, 100%. But all good. I'm glad that it's coming together finally. I know you've been working on it for quite a while, so I'm excited to see the project.
Yeah,
But today I thought I'd bring you on board to talk a little bit about not just recovery and appealing to current Scientologists, but also like the reality of Scientology. And we talk a lot about getting Scientology's tax exempt status removed and the end of the church. And I think it would be a good idea to actually just look at this idea and put some perspective into it, and maybe look at how what that would actually look like, and like give ourselves a bit of a reality check. Because if Scientology was to get its tax exempt status in the US removed tomorrow, that doesn't mean suddenly that there's no Scientologists in the world the day after, right? It's a
exactly.
process. And I think I wanted to bring you in with particularly your experience in the SEAL, but also your education, with your master's in the psychology of coercive control. You're in a really good place to like look at this with some expertise and education and knowledge to
Yeah,
kind of talk about how we actually get people to change their minds rather than just shutting down the church, right? What are your
that's right.
thoughts initially on the kind of discussion that's out there at the moment to do with how the church is going to come to an end?
Yeah, it's this is something I've been doing for 10 years now, right? And so I've seen everything, and I have participated in and thought everything there is to think about this. I think as far as, it's going to end tomorrow, it's next year, and then coming to realize sort of over time as reality sinks in and the reality of the world sinks in, and you realize the size and scope of things, that even if it is a tiny little group of 40, 30, 40,000 people, that's still 30 or 40,000 people. That's a lot of people. And Scientology has touched many, many more lives than that. And so over all this time, it is the most, we can throw figures around of, it's the most translated. There are more translated books of Scientology around the world than any other subject. That means those books exist somewhere. They're in libraries, they're in bookstores, they're in places, and every single one of those books has the potential to influence a life. To for somebody to pick it up, read it, and go, "Oh my God, this is the stuff," and start auditing and start a Dianetics group like they did all the way back in 1950. I mean, all of that could happen all over again. There's nothing stopping that from happening. So we kind of have to be realistic in our expectations of how long does it take for groups like this to actually fade from history? It takes a while. Even if it all shut down tomorrow officially, you still have, I mean, the independent Scientologists kind of demonstrate what I'm talking about here, where even if you leave the church, you can still continue practicing the practices. And that's what would happen with an awful lot of existing Scientologists. They'd keep going. And they would form groups, and they would form, field activities and things like that, because they're very dedicated to this. So even if Miscavige went to prison or something, or fell off a cliff, that doesn't mean it's all over.
I think also to consider that, particularly those in the Sea Org and those on staff, right? You've signed a contract committing your life to Scientology, and in the case of the Sea Org, it's not just your current life, but all of your future lives, right? You don't sign that unless you are fully committed and fully believe that this is the best thing you can do with your life and the most effective way of helping the most amount of people in the world and saving the planet and so on, right? You don't sign that unless you do fully believe that with your heart, every inch of your heart and your soul. So if the church was, for example, to become illegal tomorrow, right, and suddenly it was outlawed, right, to be a Scientologist, these people still have that belief. They're still, they're not going to suddenly go, oh, gee, you know what? I got it all wrong and I'm going to stop being a Scientologist now. Gosh. No, they are still going to be as committed as they were yesterday before it was made illegal. And actually, having been a Scientologist staff member myself, and I'm sure you would agree that if that were to happen, that would just make us fight even harder, right? Like if
Oh
I
yeah.
was on staff and it was suddenly, the tax exempt status was removed, or it was forcibly closed, or something dramatic like that, as a Scientologist, that would make me become even more devout and focus even more on trying to fight our corner and fight our cause. So what do you think in reality? Actually, no, maybe let's look a little bit of history first.
Mm-hmm.
If Scientology was to have their tax exempt status removed, which is something that people are really focusing on at the moment, it wouldn't be the first time that's happened, would it? Do you want to talk us through a little bit about the history of Scientology and its tax exempt status in the US?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Because that's where I was going to go with that, is the historical precedent's already been set. We already know what it looks like when Scientology has their tax exemption removed from them forcefully. That happened in 1967. L. Ron Hubbard was found to be, on investigation by the IRS, guilty of inurement, meaning he was personally profiting from the tax exempt proceeds going to Scientology. And the IRS said, hey, you're profiting so much, you're taking so much advantage, we're actually removing the tax exempt status of the Church of Scientology here in the United States. And they did so, and this caused Hubbard to freak out. This was actually part of the reason why the Sea Org started, why he went to the sea and became this sort of person that couldn't be found very easily, is because he was absolutely sure that the governments of the world were after him. Not entirely without reason, by the way. He was a tax evader, and he was a great many other things. So they were on to him, and this was his pattern all through history of Scientology. We see this pattern of Hubbard setting up in a place. That place gets wise to what he's up to, and he picks up and sets up shop somewhere else. This goes all the way back to 1950, 51, moving from New Jersey to Wichita to Phoenix to Washington, D.C., to the UK. All of this was this pattern of operation that Hubbard had. And so when the IRS came down on him, he was like, oh, I got to get away from everybody, and off to the ocean he went. So did Scientology collapse in the United States, the UK, or anywhere else in the world as a result of the IRS doing that? No, it didn't. And in fact, Hubbard began a campaign of public awareness and PR and Scientology activism to fight the IRS, to fight the FBI, to fight the government. And this also bled over into Australia, which did not, which banned Scientology in the 1960s. Straight up, it's banned in like 2 or 3 of the Australian states. And this went over like a bowl of rocks. It was not productive or effective or useful to do that at all. Because what did Scientologists do? They buried their materials in the backyard and they met in secret. They met in basements. They met here, they met there, and they fought. And they fought and they fought and they fought on legal lines to get the Supreme Court of Australia to overturn that, which they did, even though the Supreme Court of Australia acknowledged openly that Scientology looked like a fraudulent activity. Banning it was probably the wrong idea and wrong solution to that. And they pulled back on that. So Scientology survived not having tax exemption in the United States all through the 1970s, all through the 1980s, and into the 1990s when they finally got it back in 1993. And they didn't pay a dime. And they got away with it. And then they finally coerced the IRS itself through public information campaigns, PR, and legal efforts. A lot of lawsuits brought against the IRS and against its individual members. And of course, all the fair game stuff that Scientology does, they brought to the fore. They stalked individual agents. They had blackmail material on people and all the stuff they do. And they got the IRS to capitulate and cave, basically, and give in. So they got their tax exempt status back. And that's the history of that. So neither of those efforts in Australia or the United States ended Scientology. Because that's not how you go about doing this kind of thing.
You also have to remember that here in the UK, Scientology doesn't have tax exempt status. The Church of Scientology requested, they applied to the Charity Commission in 1999 saying, hey, we're tax exempt in the US, we're a religion. And they were denied because the government, part of the process is you have to prove that even if you're religious or not religious, doesn't matter. You have to prove that you are for the public benefit. And the onus on the applicant to make that, to prove that that is what they're doing and they're helping people from in a religious capacity or not, doesn't matter. And the Church of Scientology couldn't satisfy that requirement. They couldn't prove that they are for the public benefit. And so they were denied. And I actually submitted a Freedom of Information Act request fairly recently to find out whether there had been any behind the scenes work to appeal that process, or whether they're working on like a new application. I applied to the Charity Commission, and basically several questions. It was a catch-all of like, have there been any communication whatsoever between you and Scientology? Has there been any conversation about appealing it since 1999 and so on? And they came back and categorically said, no, they haven't heard an ounce from Scientology since the whole thing in 1999. So you have to remember they don't have tax exempt status here, and that's not stopping them from operating here. And, the 2021 census showed that there are about 1,800 Scientologists here in the UK. It does seem to be growing in Ireland. In 2016, there were 87 Scientologists, and in the 2022 census, which just came out the other day, it's grown by like 50% to 132. Right?
But amazing expansion, right? Yeah, of course, which they will tout without talking the numbers. We have doubled our numbers in Ireland. Yeah, I know. It's ridiculously hilarious, how this stuff works.
But it is growth nonetheless, right? And they may not be growing in the UK, but they are growing in Ireland. But it's still a very small number of people. But the point I'm trying to make here is them not having tax exemption hasn't stopped them from operating and having a very big base here and spending millions of euros in Ireland on a new centre and Narconon, and they have St Hill here in the UK. So I think I wanted to just raise awareness of that in people's minds, that even if tax exemption was removed, there's still going to be a church there and it's still going to be operating. And these things take a long time, right? If they were to have their tax exemption removed, then there's the whole appeal process, there's the legal rigmarole that's going to happen. Um, it's actually not going to really affect the church for several years afterwards, I would imagine, because they would inevitably appeal the decision and then it would all be put on pause and hold until that's resolved.
Well,
Um,
I don't know that it works that way, actually, in terms
okay,
of US tax exemption. Once the IRS pulls it, it's pulled. Like if they could have done that in 67, they would have. Once it
right.
was done, it was done. But it clearly did not stop or impede their efforts. I mean, let's be honest, 1970s were the major growth period of the Church Scientology. And that was all in the face of having their tax exemption taken away from them in 67. So if the goal is to end Scientology, tax exemption's not the way to do it. The history already tells us that. Now, all that being said, I do want to say now, it still needs to have their tax exemption taken away from them. It's not right that they are using tax exempt dollars to do what they're doing in the United States. So this is not an argument to not fight that fight. I think the argument is don't expect that to be a massive stepping stone to the end of Scientology. That's kind of the point. Would it hurt them? Oh my God, would it hurt them? It would be a crushing blow. And Miscavige's credibility would be tanked because the entire basis of David Miscavige running Scientology is he's the guy who conquered the IRS. He's the guy who won the war. And if that war were to begin again, that would really, really hamper his credibility as a so-called leader. So just to be clear about this, because I don't want people getting the wrong idea that we're saying it doesn't mean anything to remove tax exemption. It absolutely is a very, very good idea and something that should be pursued. Let's just be realistic about what the outcomes are going to be.
Yeah, I think that is so true. And this is what I wanted to do here is look at the reality, right, and have a little bit of a reality check, right. I'm not saying that there's no point in trying to remove Scientology's tax exempt status, but I think people have this assumption that that is the linchpin that's going to cause everything to collapse, and it will be very monumental and have a big impact on the potential collapse of the organization we know as the Church of Scientology. But that doesn't change people's opinions, beliefs, and mindsets, right?
That's
And I
right.
think this is where my focus very much is not on taking down the church, but maybe making people aware or changing their minds or opening up people's minds, I think is a better way of putting it. Because even if the church doesn't exist anymore, like you say, there's the independent church of Scientology, there's Ron's org and all of this, like people will still believe and practice it. How would you, as an expert in the field, go about en masse helping to change people's minds and open them up? Because I know it's very individual and there's no single solution, and every single person, it's about conversation and questions and so on. But when you're dealing with a large group of people, what do you think is an effective way of addressing that problem with people's mindsets?
Well, the way that facts and evidence and reason and intervention tactics, and dealing with people at an emotional level, are how you do an intervention with a one-on-one. But with groups of people, the sort of methodology you have available to you is what we call propaganda, or PR, or information, and because propaganda has sort of some bad overtones or connotations connected with it, but it's a methodology of changing hearts and minds on a mass scale. That's, we can go back to Bernays, the original materials on this, or you can look at how it's been used for good and how it's been used for bad, and you have a scale of influence and advertising and that kind of thing, education. Then you get into thought reform and brainwashing. You have a whole scale of this stuff. So we don't want to brainwash people out of Scientology or some nonsense like that, or do some kind of authoritarian Maoist effort where we're going to put people in re-education camps or something. That would be batshit crazy. Instead, what you do is you educate people, and this has been already begun through the efforts of, Alex Gibney, Leah Remini, Mike Rinder, the documentaries, Lawrence Wright's book, Going Clear. These are the kind of materials that gotten out on a mass scale and with emotional content to sort of get the message across that this is abusive and harmful, because it is. It's not an opinion that Scientology is bad for people. It's a fact. And we can show it. And we can show exactly how it's bad for people. And we can give testimonials and show historically, case after case after case, of people who have been material and substantively harmed by it. Not a few people, lots and lots and lots of people, which tells you that there's a problem with this organization. It's not just a few bad apples or a few broken eggs or something. It's the subject itself that's doing this to people. And we can show that. And that's what we have to do on a mass scale. And we have to continue to do that. It's a continuing operation, because you're never going to reach everybody all at once. Nothing works that way. And so especially on a planet of 8 billion people, and Scientology, we don't have to necessarily concentrate our efforts in China, because Scientology isn't there. There's nothing happening there, so we don't have to worry about all those billions of people, and we don't really have to worry too much about the billions in India. Scientology has had very little influence there. We don't have to worry about the Middle East. Scientology isn't doing anything there. So where do we have, right? We have South Africa, we have Latin America, we have America, certainly, Canada, and Europe, and the UK, kind of in there. So those are the areas that need work and focus. And that's where, fortunately, a lot of us ex-members and a lot of the free press have taken an interest in this. And it is a very interesting thing. In fact, in many ways, Scientology has outlived the sort of media cycle that tends to happen, where something gets really big and interesting, and then it fades, and nobody thinks about it ever again. Scientology has continued to be in the media since 2008. There's always been something. There was Anonymous and the protests. There was the Tampa Bay Times SP rundown. There was the Going Clear book, followed by the Going Clear documentary. Then there was Scientology in the Aftermath as an Emmy Award-winning television series that went on for 3 seasons. And there's more coming in the future. I got to be part of a French documentary recently. We'll see if that, when and if that airs, and various other things. This is an area or a subject of continual interest to people. And I think that will continue. And the subject of cults in general has taken on a kind of, what's the word for this? It's a genre now, like true crime. There are podcasts, there are television shows, there's documentaries. This is a thing, cults. And people want to know about it, and they want to understand it. And they have family, or they have friends, or they know somebody who was in a cult or is in a cult, and they don't know what to do about it. They don't quite understand it. They don't know how it works. But as the awareness of this comes up and up and up through the work of us, people will learn more and more about it. So this is the reason why I'm truly happy that your channel and other channels are picking up, because I've been doing this for 9 years, 10 years now. I'm about ready to put a cap on my Scientology stuff, because I've said everything there is to say about it many times. So I've got these projects to finish, and I'm going to be wrapping that up. And I got lots of other cult stuff to talk about, of course, but there's only so many things to say about this. So I want and need, and we need other people picking up the torch and running with it on this. And that's exactly what's happening. So I think that in answering your question, that's kind of the answer, is broad public awareness campaigns brought about by ex-members and by media, because the legal battles will move the thing down the road in terms of regulatory bodies putting the brakes on certain aspects of what Scientology does. but they're not going to end it. You know, no court is going to ban Scientology in the United States, nor do we want them to, because that creates martyrs and that creates a whole other set of problems that we really don't want. So that's my really long answer to a short question.
Yeah, and I think, if I may challenge you slightly on some
Yeah,
of
yeah,
what you just said, because
sure.
I completely agree with what you say and the impact it will have, and I 100% agree raising public awareness is really important. Um, but in my head, I don't connect the two, right? Raising public awareness and making people aware of what it does, that may accelerate the political pressure and so on to derive any tax exemption, legal battles, whatever. But I don't see how that itself actually has an impact on the current followers' mindsets and beliefs. And I know that ultimately, with the support of public awareness and so on, the pressure for the church to eventually close down, demise, whatever, will come about quicker, and therefore the time, because from the point the church closes down or is shut down or whatever, you know, it's only a matter of time before then there is no official Church of Scientology again. But I think that that public awareness piece doesn't actually have an impact on the current followers and how do we en masse reach them with this message, because people in the
Oh,
SEAL, for
yeah.
example,
Yeah, that's
won't
not going
be
to
sat here. Yeah.
yeah, that's not going to happen. And here's why. Here's how I see it playing out. The public exposure, the public awareness that I'm talking about affects the family, friends, contacts, and relationships of those who are in Scientology right now. And it does increase, it does absolutely act to increase the pressure on those Scientologists. And some of those Scientologists respond by looking at the truth of it and realizing what they're involved in and skipping out. The other thing about Scientology that I have said from literally the first video I ever made is that its own destruction is built into it. If all of us didn't do what we're doing, it's still going to end up killing itself, destroying itself, because it can't help it. It's a self-destructive system. It's an authoritarian system. It's a totalist system. All of these things are synonymous for it's self-destructive, because it doesn't last. It's a rapacious vulture culture of tearing people's lives apart. And Mark Headley put it brilliantly years ago, and I've never forgotten this, when he said the end product of Scientology is people leave Scientology. And that's what happens is they end up leaving of their own accord once they have achieved, like just like you and I did. That what happened with you and me is not some unique different thing. It's typical behavior for Scientologists. They eventually get fed up with the bullshit, basically, and they realize that they are presented, basically, how I've put it is they are generally presented with some moral dilemma that is irrefutable and undeniable that they cannot resolve. They're able to resolve various moral dilemmas all through the time that they're in. Oh, I have to not see my mom so much. Oh, maybe I shouldn't have that friend. Oh, I have to divorce my wife because she's antagonistic to Scientology. These are all moral dilemmas people are presented with. Eventually, something happens almost uniformly that the person is faced with, and they just go, I'll do anything for love, but I won't do that, right? And they skip out. They realize this is something that is not what it presents itself to be. Now, not everybody encounters this, not by a long shot, but enough do that it doesn't grow, and it's not growing right now. Scientology is a shrinking body of people, not a growing body, because they're also incredibly bad at getting new members these days. They didn't used to be, but they are now. And that's
Because I'm not there doing book sales anymore, Chris.
that's a direct result of that public awareness campaigns, because their new membership pool is all dried out, because those people know If you go out, and I've done this, and I'm sure you have, you go out and try to sell Scientology on the street, and people are like, what are you doing, you idiot? This is a cult. Why are you forwarding this to me? If they respond at all, because is generally the kind of reception you receive is L. Ron Hubbard was a liar. L. Ron Hubbard is a cult leader. You're in a cult. This is what people say, and they say it with certainty because they've watched Leah, they've watched Going Clear, they've read some books, they've watched your videos, they've watched mine, and they know what's up. So that's why there's an eventual demise there, is because we are working to dry up their recruitment pools and their feeder lines, so to speak. And then Scientology itself is so incompetent at getting new members and at their own PR, which is kind of par for the course for destructive cults, that they're doing themselves in. And I don't know if that helps explain where I'm coming from on that, but does that clarify anything in terms of your points?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one thing that I picked up on there was the idea of language and what you're exposed to as a Scientologist, right? I was in Division 6, so I was going out selling books. That was very much my job. I was faced with non-Scientologists every single day. As much as that isn't the experience of most Scientologists, because there are hundreds of different jobs in the world of Scientology, and some of them are public-facing, some of them are not. For me, I was always exposed to people calling it a cult and calling it this and that. But that wasn't enough to make me start thinking critically when I was in the church, because I was like, oh yeah, I've heard the whole Xenu story before, I've heard people call it a cult, and actually it made me think, this guy really doesn't know what he's talking about, because I'm in Scientology. I would know if it was a cult or not. I'm here because I want to be, and and the fact that he thinks it's a cult shows just how moronic and stupid he is, and how much he really does actually need Scientology, and he needs me to explain to him even more to prove him wrong that it's not a cult.
That's right.
And I think that's something really interesting.
You're describing the internal resolution of the cognitive dissonance, right? You're presented with antagonistic facts or information, right? Which bumps right up against the facts you already have, and you got to resolve that. And you go, oh, this guy's an idiot, right? This guy needs Scientology more than I do. Of course, I used to think the same things, right? This is what a true believer does. This is why they remain a true believer all the way up until they don't. All the way up until they can't resolve the cognitive dissonance. It won't resolve because the moral dilemma that they are faced with is too much. It's too strong. It's their breaking point, so to speak. You ran into it. I ran into it. We didn't see it coming. It had to hit us like a freight train in order for us to go, oh, it's always unexpected. It's always unpredicted for. You think I thought I'm going to be in this forever. I signed a Sea Org contract. I mean, I was in it forever. And I really believe that. I was a true believer. There are people who say they weren't. I was. And I was dedicated. And then I realized after 27 years that I was a martyr. I was like, what? I never signed on to be a damn martyr. That's not what this is about. Nobody told me to sacrifice my life, and I wasn't going to get up the bridge. I wasn't going to get any of the goods. But that's what happened, right? And I was like, wait a minute, this isn't right. And I got out. And so we all run into that breaking point. But up until we do, we are absolutely committed. But that committal that's the cult experience. That's not a reason why Scientology is going to persist forever, as proven by the fact that you and I did hit a breaking point and we did get out.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one thing to consider, again, on this reality point is we all know now about the CST bases, right? Church of Spiritual Technology. There's a huge preservation project going on in Scientology, and has been going on for years, where I always get this the wrong way around. It's like is it things are being ascribed in, is it titanium plates in gold boxes or gold plates in titanium boxes? I think it's gold plates in titanium boxes, pumped with argon gas and like stored in these nuclear proof underground bunkers. There's several of them across the states. I'm sure there are some in other countries as well. Like the whole the idea is to preserve LRH tech for eternity. And I think it's not exactly the nicest thought, but it is something we do need to realize. If the church was to collapse tomorrow, these things are still there and they are not going anywhere. So it is very possible that in 10, 15, 20,000 years, when they're digging up our civilization like we did with the pyramids and with the Stone Age and so on, and thinking, what did they believe? They're going to find L. Ron Hubbard tech and think they were all Scientologists.
That's right. That's exactly right. It's hilariously, tragically, ironic, or whatever, that it very well could be that if this is Scientology, if this society, if our world, through climate change or other means, ends up going dystopian and shrinking rapidly, or shrinking, to just a few, thousand or tens of thousands of human beings left on the planet for some reason, and then we build back up and perhaps evolve into, some other form or whatever. But however intelligent life continues on this planet, those vaults are there. And we should be clear. I think I talked about this recently in one of my Q&A shows too. It's not just Hubbard's materials that are etched into titanium, or his recordings that are on these, nickel-plated records that can be played on a solar-powered record player. it's dictionary.
Just that sentence in itself is just like whack.
I know. I mean, they really have. That very intelligent people in Scientology have really applied themselves to this project. This project is L. Ron Hubbard's legacy. It is the core of Scientology that this project be pulled off successfully. And the project is to not only preserve L. Ron Hubbard's written words and spoken words, but to be able to have them communicated to anyone who finds them all those, hundreds or thousands of years from now. Which means that in those vaults are not just the Hubbard's written works, but dictionaries, encyclopedias, grammar books, English books, books and materials that will communicate the English language to people. Every single book L. Ron Hubbard ever refers to, every reference he makes, they're also in those vaults. So it's like the complete subject and everything you need to know to learn that subject, from knowing absolutely nothing about the English language even. That's what's in those vaults. And it occurred to me recently, I was like, holy crap. It well could be that Scientology could pick back up in 10,000 years, and none of our YouTube videos or books are going to survive. But those vaults might. And wouldn't that be just the ultimate in historical tragedy, right? For it to all pick up again and people to have to relearn all the lessons we've already learned. Because it's the system itself. It's not just L. Ron Hubbard was a bad guy who used a system in a bad way. The framework of control that he sets up, the very structure of an auditing session and how it operates is what's the word? It's antithetical to one's mental health. It's just not good for you. And it's a brilliantly put together system of authoritarian control. That's what it is. And so, could we see it resurge in 10,000 years? Yeah, that kind of could happen. So maybe part of the effort, if it ever does die off, is to go find those vaults and raid them, because I'm telling you, millions and millions and tens of millions of dollars has been spent on that effort. It is not a nothing effort. It is the people who run that thing and do that work are deadly serious about making it work.
And this is the thing, there is not a part of the Church of Scientology or any even like independent Scientologist that is going to um do anything towards destroying these vaults, right? Even if the church was to demise and close down and all of this, and we're talking here about the end of the church, even the most, the most committed Scientologists are never gonna, because this is, like you say, the legacy. It's the most important thing. Like, even if those last hangers on are like, okay, the church is down, I'm admitting defeat, it's okay, because rest assured, I know that at least the tech is still there for future generations. So there's no part of Scientology that will ever destroy or remove these vaults. And let's think about this again, reality check, right? Whoever then takes over that land that these vaults are on, even if it's the government, it's going to cost millions of dollars to remove and destroy these vaults and what's contained in them. And there is no financial incentive or any incentive whatsoever, really, for any particular group or company or government to go and spend all that money to do that. So it is a very real possibility that even if the church does end, that these things will prevail. So like you say, I think, yeah, if the church does end, maybe we need to go and raid them. Or alternatively, maybe we should start a fundraiser to start etching all of our YouTube videos into gold plates into our own nuclear bunker. What do you think?
That's hilarious. My ego says yes, absolutely. Let's do that. Yeah, absolutely. Let's get that fun. Let's get that Kickstarter going right now.
We only need $100 million, Chris. I think we can do it.
A pittance, just a little tiny bit. Yeah, I think that would be hilarious. Because you're absolutely right, of course. If this whole thing folded tomorrow, nobody's going to go out to Trementia or wherever these things are in California or Wyoming and tear them apart. Nobody's going to be incentivized to do that. And you're absolutely right. It would be a massive undertaking to do so, because these things are not just a box in the ground. These go down. They're like big tubes, big, huge concrete tubes that go deep into the ground. Tony Ortega's shown blueprints of these things. I mean, or imagery of this stuff, and it's involved. It's complicated. And again, the people who did this work were not messing around. They were very, very serious about making this work. So, and they had the money and the resources and the time to do it. This has been a project that's been going on since the 1980s, continually, just continuously going. In fact, this is probably what Shelley Miscavige is actually working on these days, is this exact project.
Did you have any inkling whatsoever that this was going on when you were in Scientology, when you were in the Sea Org?
I did, yeah, because it was popularized.
What did you know about?
It was talked about for fundraising purposes in the 1980s, and then they stopped talking about it a lot. It's only mentioned here and there. There is a preservation of the tech presentation that you can go see, which is at the Author Services facility in Hollywood, where they'll show you the titanium plates and the gold or the nickel plated records, and they'll this is how I know about all this stuff, is because this is what I learned while I was a Scientologist, about the solar powered record players and all that. And they wanted people to understand that they were serious about this and that these plans were real and that they were moving forward on them, and they were soliciting donations for it. I don't think they solicit for it anymore. The church just funds it by channeling money over to CST, which is one of the three primary organizations that actually is the Church of Scientology. So that's how I know about it.
Wow. Because I know that they broke their silence about it by putting a documentary together on their Scientology TV thing.
That's
and
right.
up until that, I remember when I was in Scientology, we knew that there was a preservation project going on, but not like, this was news to me when I saw all the articles on Tony Ortega's blog and so on about it, and then I saw finally the Scientology documentary about it, because I watched it because I actually was really interested, and I was like, wow, okay. And it is an interest. That's probably the only Scientology video that I do find actually quite fascinating and interesting to see, because they do show you how they're doing all of this, and it just shows how dedicated they are. But
that's right.
Anyway, moving.
Quite randomly, I have twice bumped into people who were not Scientologists, who had nothing to do with Scientology, but were involved in some profession that Scientology had reached out to and contacted and had and contracted to do work for the CST project. In other words, I met a guy one time who did etching on titanium plates, and Scientology had hired him
Wow.
for that. And I met another person, and this was just totally randomly. This is over the last 10 years. Met another person who had been involved with another aspect of it. So they're out there. I mean, that Scientology has been working on this continuously, for a very long time. And it's not talked about a lot inside Scientology, but it's always kind of there. It's not like it's a big secret like Xenu is. Nobody's hush hush about it, but they just don't bring it up very often.
Mm. And why do you think that is? Sorry, we're going down a massive tangent here, but I think it's
Yeah.
worth it. Why do you think that is? Like, why is it not talked about inside Scientology? Because I remember talking about, or hearing about this preservation project and thinking, that's really cool, that's great, that's super important, because it's important that the tech prevails and it's preserved. It's so that when people find it or whatever, it's exactly what L. Ron Hubbard said and wrote, rather than like a piece of a book here and a piece of a book there. So it was like, it's important that it is preserved. But like you say, it was never really a conversation beyond, oh, that's cool. Like, I never wanted to ask any more questions about it, which
Well,
I
that's
don't
exactly
understand why.
That's why.
Mm,
That's exactly why. Your response to it is exactly the answer to the question, because that's how all Scientologists feel about it is, oh, that's interesting. That's good. Good on you guys. Well done. But it was not a big fundraising opportunity. And let's be real, right? Scientology is collecting those Benjamins. So because it's not a big fundraising thing, what it actually is it's a vehicle, as far as David Miscavige is concerned, it's a vehicle to send church funds to, so as to prove to the IRS that they're doing what they said they were going to do per the 1993 tax exemption agreement. This was one of the things they told the IRS they were doing. There were other projects that they said they were going to do, which have never seen the light of day. There were obelisks and some other things they were going to do that they never did.
no.
Oh yeah, oh yeah,
Really?
oh. If you go back to
Obelisk?
the I recommend you go check out that 93 agreement. There is some weird stuff in there. But this CST project is one of those things. And again, it's legacy of Hubbard, and it's real, and it's a great way for David Miscavige to show that money is being invested back into the church and back into a legacy religious project that has religious significance to the church, and therefore look at how legit we are. So that's why I believe that's my thinking on why David Miscavige continues this. Because honestly, I don't think he gives a shit, right? I don't think David Miscavige as an individual cares about this at all. But but it's a great way to prove, this to the IRS. For individual Scientologists, there's no service potential, there's no case gain. In other words, there's no progress up the bridge. There's no euphoria induced by learning about this. It's just interesting. Oh, that's really interesting. Okay, what else you got for me? And that's why it's probably not really talked about a whole lot versus the materials, the ideal orgs, we're taking over the civilization, all this kind of talk and rhetoric they get into. That's where the brunt of the PR work in Scientology is done, because that's all about creating a positive future. The preservation of the tech project is a negative outcome. It's a negative future. It's if all of this is over tomorrow and you're floating around as a Thetan and you don't know what the hell to do, well, we'll have these vaults. It is not really it's not a very hopeful message compared to we're conquering the civilization, give us all your money so we can keep conquering it faster. For me, that's the push pull of that.
That is so true. I mean, in Scientology, part of the information control that goes on is this idea of theta and n theta news, right? So, like, a good positive stories and bad negative stories, whether they're about Scientology or not, just in general. I remember being on staff and, talking about something that happened in the news, and someone would say, why do you bother watching the news? Or why do you bother reading a newspaper? And I'm like, because it's important to know what's going on in the world. And they go, yeah, but next time you read a newspaper or next time you turn on the news, think about it. The majority of it's negative. And why would you want to feed yourself with this negative stuff? And someone said there is a news website I read, which is, I can't remember what it's called, but it's like some happynews.com or something like that, where it's only positive stories. And I was like, okay, I'll give that a go. And it was like really not interesting stuff. It wasn't news, it wasn't politics, it wasn't economics, it wasn't what's going on in the world. It was like, so and so helped an old lady cross the road the other day, which is nice, right? It's good, like, pick me up stuff, but it doesn't give you context to what's going on in the world. And I kind of got where they were coming from about it being negative, but I started to censor myself and the information that I looked up, because you don't want to feed yourself with bad energy almost, right? It's kind of like an energy thing, right?
That's right.
And I think that plays into the idea of how we address and talk to current Scientologists that may be watching these videos, right?
Sure.
To put this into perspective, I left Scientology, or I got kicked out in 2014. I probably stopped considering myself a Scientologist around 2016 ish. It wasn't until I spoke to you. You were the first ever former Scientologist I ever spoke to. And that was in 2021, 22, right?
Mhm.
2022. It was like less than a year ago. So in all of that time, I just kind of filed it away in my head, in my brain, didn't really think about it, moved on with my life. And if ever anything to do with Scientology came up, I kind of felt a bit awkward and I would never comment on it. The majority of my friends had no idea I was in Scientology until I started my channel, because I just kind of like moved on and didn't think about it. And then I realized it was still affecting me in my daily life. And that's when I started, researching it and opening the can of worms. But there was a very long period of time where I was watching your videos and other YouTubers and not commenting publicly, just watching and absorbing. And before I was ready to think about it myself or speak out or reach out to anybody. And I think that is something a lot of people don't realize, is that people will probably be watching your videos and my videos that are currently in Scientology, but not ready to leave or not
Yep.
ready to confront it in their mind or speak out, which is totally fine. But it's, even though I'd been out for so long, I was still very affected by the language used, right? I was really turned off by any videos I would see in which someone would call it a cult or attack Scientology and say it's this horrible, nasty thing. And for that reason, I deliberately don't go on the attack in my videos, right? That doesn't mean I'm defending it or I'm an apologist or anything like this, but because I'm casting my mind back to where I was when I was out, but before I was ready to confront it in my brain. Because you're programmed as a Scientologist to pick up on certain words, and as soon as someone calls it a cult or says it's, goes on the attack, my mind would have gone straight to the place of, see, this guy clearly has got an axe to grind, he's clearly pissed off, and he's therefore going to exaggerate stuff, and he's making it seem worse than it is, and Scientology is not all that bad, really, right? So I deliberately don't do that in my videos, because I feel like the message is going to be better received by people currently in Scientology or people in that stage. What's
Yep.
your take on it? And what are your thoughts on my little spiel slash rant I
No,
just had? Sorry.
absolutely. Yeah, no, absolutely. I when I started doing YouTube videos, I thought the exact same thing, and I produced content. My initial videos about Scientology were an appeal to Scientologists as much as they were an effort to educate the public at large. The entire theme of my initial 6 videos were Scientology, its destruction is built into its DNA. And I very much was thinking with Debbie Cook's email, which had made such an impact on me when I was in the Sea Org, when it came out New Year's 2011, where I It was mostly, her email was a very long email, but it was mostly L. Ron Hubbard quotes. Here's a policy. Here's what L. Ron Hubbard said. And then here's a little snippet, or here's a bit about how the church is blatantly, grossly violating that. And then here's another quote where here's what L. Ron Hubbard says, and here's how Scientology is actually not doing that or conforming with that policy, or how Miscavige has trashed that policy. The Ideal Org program being at the top of the list. There are a number of L. Ron Hubbard quotes which make it crystal clear he would in no way, shape, or form be in support of what they're doing. It's the exact opposite of what he said to do, and he spelled it out in crystal clear terms. So I thought that had real value. It certainly affected me, and so I produced content that was reflective of that. That's why you see a lot of screen, shots of L. Ron Hubbard quotes, and even me pulling stuff out of lectures and things and just playing it. I wanted the broad public to hear L. Ron Hubbard in his own words rather than my interpretation of it. And two, I wanted the Scientologists to see the contradictions, because Scientology is packed with double binds and contradictions. Just flat out, he says one thing here and he does another thing here, or it says one thing here and Miscavige is doing the exact opposite. So I think that has a certain degree of educational appeal and of conversion appeal, you could say, or deconversion appeal for people who are still in. There came a point where, and it was maybe a year or two, probably within the first year and a half, where it occurred to me that I was only going to reach so many people in Scientology, and really my effort shifted purposefully away from that. Because I realized if I spend all my time or efforts concentrated on that public, well, I already know a very tiny percent of that public are even going to be willing to look at my content just because I'm an ex-Scientologist. It's that, the landmines are laid quite well to avoid looking at or being connected with anyone like us when you're in the church. So I realized it was a bit of not a unworthy effort or something not worth doing, but I realized if I was going to grow a channel and actually try to do something more effective about Scientology than deconverting its members, I needed to switch gears to language that general people were going to understand a lot better. And the word cult has all kinds of controversy connected with it, and that's a reason it grabs attention. And that's a reason why I will use it. And I will define it in any number of videos, as I have done many, many times, of saying, look, it's a word that has a lot of different definitions, but basically the concept is it's a culture. It's short for culture. That's where it comes from. And that's what Scientology is. That's what a cult is it's a little bubble world. Another word for bubble world is culture. There's rules, there's guidelines, there's social mores and morals and all kinds of things that are built into it. That's what makes it a culture. And we use the term destructive cult. I grabbed that from Steve Hassan right from the get-go, of differentiating it from a cult like, the Catholic Church or an acting class or some non-controversial, non-harmful group that you could still use the word cult for. Let's call it a destructive cult. So we're really super clear about what we're talking about. And I know that has negative connotations with existing Scientologists. I know it. And yet, 10 years out, I can think back to all the emails I've received from all the ex-Scientologists who tell me, despite the fact I've been using that word all these years, they still, once they got hold of my content, like you just said, they just kind of couldn't stop watching. And so I realized maybe it's not that it's much ado over nothing. It is a controversial word, but I don't think it's the barrier, that some people think it is to communicating with people who are still in.
I think it's really clear in the way I describe it as well, and the difference between a a cult and a coercive group or destructive cult, like you're saying, there are people who go to the gym and are really into the gym,
Yep.
and that's it's a bit culty, right? There are
Yep.
lots of things that are kind of cults, but that doesn't mean they're coercive or manipulative or destructive. And I think
That's right.
this is what I was mentioning earlier about that time period between me leaving and the time at which I realized it was still affecting me. This is what makes Scientology a coercive group and a manipulative group, and one that has long lasting impact, not just because of the church, but because of it's fundamental in the way that it operates and works. Like, it changes the way you think and the way you process information. And that's something that affected me many years after leaving. I wasn't thinking about Scientology. I wasn't talking to any Scientologists. I wasn't immersed in that whatsoever. But it hit me like a ton of bricks. I was like, I'm still thinking like a Scientologist in this part of my brain or in this circumstance or whatever. And that's what I think people don't understand about the abuse and the horror stories and all of this that you hear about Scientology. Yes, there is a place for those things to be exposed and talked about, and that yes, they absolutely do happen. It's not the experience of every Scientologist, but that doesn't mean every Scientologist isn't coerced, manipulated, and abused. Let's face it, because the way I thought and processed information changed, right? And that's a form of mental abuse that I wasn't even aware of until years later. And that's what I mean, is that it's really built into the core of what Scientology is. It's not about the management or David Miscavige or the way that it's delivered. It's literally, that's the consequence of Scientology in itself. And even though I don't outwardly go on the attack against Scientology, that doesn't mean I don't acknowledge and recognize and agree with the harmful effects that it has on people, right?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. It's a difference between, do you want to make a black and white argument or do you want to make a more nuanced argument? It's not a matter of labeling people who make nuanced arguments into apologists or something. It's not about, well, I'm not agreeing with your extreme black and white position, therefore I'm on the side of the bad guys. That's black and white thinking. And that's what Scientology inculcates. That's what they love. They want that. They want that. They want people thinking that way. You're either with us or against us. There's no in between, right? It's you're 100% on board or you're just worthless. And people in the X community can come out of Scientology or other destructive cults, because this happens with every one of them, with that habit of being black and white thinkers. It's 100%, right? It's my way or the highway. And that's what we run into over and over and over again with in this so-called community, right? In this world of people. And so that's just another thing you got to deal with.
And it takes a long time for people to even realize sometimes that they're thinking in a black and white way,
Good
right?
point.
I was having
Exactly.
a conversation with someone the other day about, like, their point was, how on earth could you fall for a cult? It's so stupid, or blah blah blah, like so anti it in so many ways, which is a whole nother discussion. But I realized, and this is the point I was saying, was, right, you are thinking in a binary black or white way, which is what Scientology does, and that's what they do in the opposite opinion. But it's like you say, our way or the highway. It's like you're with us or against us.
Yeah.
You are thinking with the same mindset, just on the opposite side of things. And actually, that might make you more prone to fall for Scientology than someone who is in the grey area like myself now. And I was trying to explain to this person that even though you think that you would never be so stupid and you would never fall for a cult, they would never get me, because you're so 100% on it, that's actually probably easier to convert than someone who looks at it and goes, well, no, look, there are some positive experiences that some people get from Scientology. It has to have some benefit, otherwise people wouldn't join. But it's got the negatives and the abuse. And so, and when you look at it critically and with that grey area of nuance, you almost actually defend yourself and, you know, protect yourself from falling for that sort of group, right?
Well, absolutely. In fact, that's exactly the armor and shield you need in all of life. And this is why teaching critical thinking skills in schools, certainly in university, is absolutely required, and it's not anywhere near done enough to prepare people critically for life. They are too many children, too many people are brought up in this kind of black and white paradigm, either through their religion or through their ideology, through their politics, and through their familial connections and whatnot. And this ruins them. This can ruin their thinking for years because they don't understand shades of gray. They don't understand nuance. And they approach the world as though this is how it's supposed to be. It becomes a moral issue for them. You're wrong. You're not only are you wrong, you're evil if you don't think the way I think. And that's where we really lose our goddamn minds. And this is just a human problem. This is a tendency of the human mind and the way we categorically think that cult leaders take advantage of. It's not a cult phenomenon to engage in black and white thinking. Almost everybody does it in one fashion or another. It's recognizing it and overcoming it that the critical thinking education allows you to do. And that's why it's so important we teach those skills as well.
Absolutely. Chris, thank you so much for coming on my channel. Is there anything that you wanted to say that we didn't cover before we wrap things up here?
No, I thought we covered the stuff you brought up quite well. I'm very happy to have actually ended with that bit about education, because that it's crucial. We have to realize that what goes on in cults is what goes on in every single human group. It's just what goes on in cults is dialed up to 11. All the same phenomena exist in every single group. They just take it to an extreme. And once you can kind of see that, you recognize those shades of gray, everything really starts making a lot more sense in life. So I really recommend looking into and educating yourself about this stuff. And cults are an amazing vehicle to enter into the world of critical thinking. And some people, like your friend, don't go there. They just are content with their ego trip, and I'm a superior to it all. And I really feel bad for those people, because they're really not getting the potential education they could get out of this subject to improve their own lives. So thanks for having me on here to talk about this stuff.
No problem. Thanks so much, Chris. I really appreciate it.